right along with what I want to talk about this morning too. Because, you see, it's not just us as parents and grandparents that have that lesson that we have to teach our children about saying thank you and appreciating the giver. Jesus had the same issue with adults in his ministry. It happened numerous times, and it usually happened along with miracles. It usually happened when Jesus would perform a miracle. Now, we've been looking at the miracles of Jesus because they are sermons in action. Sermons in action. That's what the miracles are. Jesus always has an ulterior motive for performing the miracle other than just what's on the face of what he's doing. He might heal a person, but there's a spiritual meaning underneath that. He might bring sight to the blind. There's a spiritual truth there. He heals a withered hand. There's spiritual truth. He feeds the 5,000 with just 5 loaves and 2 little fish. There's a spiritual lesson there that he's trying to get the people to understand, but what often happens is people miss it. They're so focused on the gift that they don't see the giver. They don't understand the purpose of the gift and what it's trying to show them about the giver. They just completely miss it. And that's true in the case of feeding the 5,000. So this morning we are going to be looking at John chapter 6, verse 22, and it goes to 40, but I don't think we're going to read every bit of it. We'll see. We might get through all of it. Now, this is the account of what happens after the feeding of the 5,000. We're not going to look at the actual account of the feeding of the 5,000. We're going to look at the passage of Scripture that teaches us the purpose of the feeding of the 5,000 people on that day. We're going to see the lesson that Jesus wanted the people to see, but they were missing. And he's going to try to teach them this idea and this understanding that what God wants from us is a relationship built on love for him. Not to focus on what he gives us, but to focus on him, the source of everything, the source of our purpose for existence. And we're going to see that today. We're going to learn about that today. So if you would follow along with me, it's a fairly large passage here, but I want to read through it because it's important. So verse 22, I'm going to start there. On the following day, this is the day after the feeding of the 5,000, when the people were standing on the other side of the sea, and they saw that there was no other boat there except that which his disciples had entered, and that Jesus had not entered the boat with his disciples, but his disciples had gone away alone. However, other boats came from Tiberias, near the place where they had ate bread after the Lord had given thanks. When the people therefore saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they got into boats. They came to Capernaum, seeking Jesus, and when they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Jesus was trying to get away from everybody to spend some time with God. Parents, you understand that, right? The kids are always asking for something, so you go hide in the bathroom for a little bit to hopefully have some moments of silence until you hear a little knock on the door. You know how that goes, right? Hey, I need this, I need that. Jesus is trying to get away, and they're coming after him. Verse 26, Jesus answered them and said, "Most assuredly I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled. Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal on him." This is extremely important. He's trying to teach them the purpose, the sermon that's in the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. In other words, all you cared about is what I gave you that day, and you didn't see the giver, is essentially what Jesus is saying here. Let's go on to verse 28. Then they said to him, "What shall we do that we may work the works of God?" Jesus answered and said to them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he sent." Therefore they said to him, "What sign will you perform then, that we may see it and believe you? What work will you do? Our fathers ate the manna in desert, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." I can't imagine. I can picture Jesus looking at them and going, "I just gave you a sign. I just took a little bit of bread and fed 5,000 men, not including the number of their wives and children. Took a little bit of fish and fed all of you. That was a sign to point you to the giver, not the gift. I want you to focus on the source of where it's coming from, because that's what's important. There they are asking for a sign again. They're not getting it. They're not understanding. But Jesus, being Jesus, he's patient and he's loving. And so he continues to try to explain it to them. Then Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Then they said to him, Lord, give us this bread always. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have seen me and yet do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out. For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of the Father who sent me, that all he has given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up at the last day. And this is the will of him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. In other words, that's his whole point for coming. Essentially, he is the bread. Not the bread that he spread out and performed this miracle to feed everybody. It's he himself is that bread. Let's dig a little bit deeper in this passage. The first thing I want to point out, and we need to understand, and what the people needed to understand, and they didn't get it, I don't think, until Jesus explained it here, is that everything, whether it's physical nourishment, spiritual nourishment, life itself, purpose and meaning, our entire existence, is all because of God, period. Sounds like a simple statement, but it seems so hard and challenging for people to understand that. They said, well, Moses gave manna from heaven, and Jesus said that wasn't Moses. Moses was just a tool that God used to fulfill his purpose for his people. The manna came from God. The manna from heaven that nourished the physical bodies of your ancestors came from God. The bread that I contributed to you in feeding all of you from that little amount of food is coming from God. The whole point of it is to point you to salvation and understand that I am the nourishment for you. My living, my dying, my rising, my continuous living. Your source of strength, your source of eternity, if you want any of that, it must come from me. You must consume me, so to speak. That's what communion's about. You take the bread. It's a symbol of Jesus being the manna from heaven, the bread coming from God. It's not about the physical food, because they'll eat that food that God gave that day in the feeding of the 5,000, and it's going to be used up. It's not about that. It's about knowing God and understanding that we need to focus on the giver. We must focus on the giver, because without the giver, there are no gifts. Most assuredly, I say to you, it was not Moses that gave you bread from heaven, but it's my Father who gives you true bread from heaven. Why is it so important that God provides? That we understand that he is the one that provides. Why is that so important for these people? Why is it that Jesus is frustrated that they're not understanding this concept? First of all, he's the only one that can provide, right? He's the only one that can do this because he's God. Only God can provide. Nor is there salvation in any other, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Acts 4:12. So it's only through God that salvation can come. That's the first reason. The second reason is God will not give his glory to anyone else, and rightfully so, because he created the universe and everything within it and everything in physical existence and spiritual existence and the whole realm that we live in. God has created it, and he is worthy to be worshiped and glorified by his creation. Isaiah 42:8. I am the Lord, that is my name, and my glory I will not give to another, nor my praise to carved images. We kind of experience and we understand this concept a little bit, because that's the whole reason why when our children are given a gift, we say, now what do you say? What do you say? You say thank you. Why? Because we understand the concept that when someone is providing something to someone else, the giver must be recognized. That's ingrained in us. We recognize the giver and we appreciate them. We love them. There's a relationship there with the giver in the midst of the giving of the gift. And if we ignore it completely, it's disrespectful. It's rude because it's not even acknowledging the giver. It's ignoring them completely. So this idea of appreciating the giver, it's ingrained in us. We understand that. In a sense, we want to glorify the person who is so good to give something, right? We want to recognize them and honor them. And it's even on a larger scale with God. That's ingrained in our very psyche as human beings. And ultimately, it's to point us to understand that everything comes from God and we should continually bring glory and honor and praise to Him. And that brings joy to Him, and then that enters us into a right and correct relationship with Him. God demands glory for Himself, and it's right that He does. He must provide because His glory demands it, and He's the only one who can provide for us. What is it that we usually want in our sin nature for Him to provide? It's the whole reason we have to teach children to appreciate the giver. We're so focused on what's being given that we worship the gift and not praise and honor the giver. We ignore the giver. We focus on the gifts. We focus on the material things. We want more money. We want more of this, more of that. We want those things. And that's what we focus on. As we just read, Jesus said, most assuredly I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the signs, not because you understood the point of the sermon in action of the feeding of the 5,000. You're not seeking me because you want me. You're not seeking me because you want a relationship with the giver. You're not seeking me for that. You are seeking me because you want what I can just give you physically. More food to make life easier for you. You don't really care about me. You don't want salvation for your souls. You just want stuff. And you're missing the whole point. You're missing the whole point of what I was trying to teach you. You see, this happened long ago in Exodus. This happened when Israel came out of Egypt and they're in the wilderness and they don't have food. So what does God do? He provides manna from heaven. What does He tell them? What does He tell the Israelites? Go out each day and gather what you need for the day, which was about 3 pounds of whatever this stuff was. We don't know what it was. Manna literally means, what is it? When you say manna, it's actually a question. What is that? That's what they did. They came out that day and they're like, what is that stuff? Okay, well, that's what we'll call it. Did you gather your what is it today? That's what they called it. Did you gather your what is it? Is there enough for you? Did you get 3 pounds of it? And so they got 3 pounds a day. If they gathered more than 3 pounds each person, or if they went out and they tried to save it overnight, it would rot by morning. They had to go out each and every day to gather the physical nourishment they needed. And then on the last day of the week, they would gather double because on Sunday they wouldn't go out and gather it. It actually kept that night to have for the next day. Why would God do it like that? Why did He do that? Why didn't He teach them how to can their manna? Why didn't He teach them how to gather a whole bunch of it and then pickle it and put it in cans and preserve it for a long time? Why didn't He do that? That would have been easy, right? He had some pickled manna. Break out a can of manna for everybody. What is it? The reason why is because God wanted them to understand that He is the source of nourishment, physically, spiritually, everything about their life. He is the foundation and source, and He wanted them to constantly have to rely and trust on Him every single day for nourishment. And when people went out and tried to gather more than they should have, He was upset about it. He was frustrated because it was that old sin nature creeping out of their hearts, saying, I'm going to take care of things myself. I don't need God to provide for me. I'm going to take matters into my own hands and provide for myself. That was the whole dilemma with Adam and Eve and eating of the fruit. The serpent said, you don't need God anymore. You can be God. You don't need to celebrate and worship the giver. You can just enjoy the gifts and ignore the giver. You don't need him. That's the great lie. That's where sin starts. The manna from heaven, the bread, and the feeding of the 5,000 is all meant to do the same thing, to point us to God. So what does God provide? What does he provide for us? What is the whole point of this bread from heaven analogy, this manna coming down analogy, this feeding of the 5,000 story, sermon in action analogy? What's the point of it? It's to point us to what our real need is, and our real need is Jesus Christ. He literally calls himself the bread from heaven. He says, I am the bread. Jesus says, I am the manna. I am the manna. The whole thing of manna coming down and God providing food for your ancestors was meant to point you to me. It was meant for you to see me. It was meant as prophecy pointing to the future of my coming. I am the bread. I am the manna from heaven that has come down to nourish you. And if you eat and partake of me, you'll never go hungry again. You'll have everything you need. You will be satisfied because you were created by God to only be able to be satisfied deep within your soul by having a relationship with your Creator. We were created to be that way. That's why nothing else in this world truly satisfies. You can chase money, you can become an alcoholic, you can become a drug addict, you can chase relationships and things and whatever else. And it might appease you for a little bit, but eventually you're left feeling empty. The reason why is because there is only one thing that can fill your soul, and that is knowing your Creator. That is having a relationship with Him. These people were coming to Jesus, and they were following Him, and they were saying, we want more food. Give us more of that bread that you just pulled out of a hat. Give us some more. And He says, you're missing the point. Those are just frivolous things. It's not going to last. What matters is your soul that will be for all eternity. And you need to consume me. You need to embrace me. You need to partake of me. And if you do, you will truly be satisfied for the rest of eternity. Not just today or tomorrow, but forever. Come back in a relationship with your Creator. Appreciate the giver. Life-giving food for your soul. That is what Jesus is. Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set His seal on Him. For the bread of God is He who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst again. Jesus provides the greatest need for your soul. Jesus is the strength to keep us from eternal death and provide us eternal life. This morning, as the invitation is played, I invite you to come. If you have been focused on the gifts and have not been focusing on the giver, now's the time to change that. Apply that age-old lesson you were taught as a child and focus on what God is and who He is. That relationship with Him. Appreciate the giver of all things. Focus upon Him. Love Him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. There's the greatest commandment right there. That's what He's talking about. Jesus is essentially saying, love God with all your heart. I am the bread of life. Love me. I am God in the flesh. I am salvation. Let's restore that relationship. You can come this morning and do that. If you've never done that, I invite you to come this morning and give your life to the Lord. Focus upon Him. Appreciate the giver of salvation. Cherish Him. Find joy and peace on a level that can't be compared to anything else. So this morning, as the invitation is played, I invite you to come. Maybe you just need to talk to the Lord. Maybe you just need to say, God, help me focus upon you. Help me find joy and satisfaction in you. You can come now, and you can do that. So if you would, please stand with me as we sing, I Surrender All.